Every morning at exactly 6:40, Elias Hart parked his black sedan outside a small yellow house on the edge of the city. He never honked. He never rushed anyone. He just sat there, engine humming softly, waiting for his daughter to run out with her backpack half open and her shoelaces usually untied. Noor was 8 years old, and she was the only reason Elias got out of bed every single day. Her mother had passed away almost 3 years ago, and since then, it had just been the two of them. Elias used to be a soldier, not the kind you see in movies with loud explosions and dramatic music. He was the quiet kind. The kind who did his job, came home, and never talked about what happened overseas. After his wife died, he made a decision. No more danger, no more long deployments, no more risking his life for strangers. He wanted a boring life, a safe life, a life where his daughter would never have to grow up without both her parents. So he became a driver. Not just any driver. He worked for a private car service that handled important clients, business executives, company owners, people who needed to get from one meeting to another without wasting time in traffic. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady, and it let him pick Noor up from school most days. That mattered more to him than any paycheck ever could. For the last year, Elias had been assigned to one client in particular. Her name was Renata Voss, and she was the CEO of a growing pharmaceutical company called Voss Biotech. She was smart, sharp, always busy, always on her phone answering emails before the car even left the driveway. To her, Elias was just part of the background of her day, a calm presence, a man who opened doors, drove smoothly, and never said more than a few words unless she spoke first. She didn't know anything about his past. She didn't know he used to carry a rifle instead of a car key. She didn't know that behind his quiet eyes was a man who had once been trained to notice everything, every unusual car, every person standing a little too long in one place, every pattern that didn't feel right. She just knew he was reliable. And in her world, reliable was rare. Renata's company was on the edge of something huge. After years of research, her team had developed a new treatment that could change the lives of thousands of patients. The official announcement was just weeks away, and once it went public, the company's value would skyrocket. Investors were excited, employees were hopeful, but not everyone was happy about it. There were other companies, bigger, older, more ruthless, who saw Renata's success as a threat. Some had tried to buy her out. She refused. Some had tried to poach her top scientists. She fought back and kept her team together. And now, with the announcement so close, the pressure around her had changed. It felt heavier, different. At first it was small things. A strange phone call late at night with no one on the other end. A car that seemed to follow her a little too closely on the way to the office. Her head of security brushed it off as nerves, as stress before a big announcement. "You're just anxious," he told her. "It's normal before something this big." But Elias didn't think it was normal. He never said anything to Renata directly, because he wasn't paid to give opinions, and he wasn't the type to speak unless it truly mattered. But quietly, without telling anyone, he started paying closer attention. He began changing their route home, taking slightly longer paths that avoided empty streets and tight corners. He started arriving 15 minutes early instead of 10, just to walk around the car and check underneath it before she got in. He moved a small folding knife from the glove compartment to the inside pocket of his jacket, not because he expected to use it, but because old habits from a different life were quietly waking back up inside him. At home, none of this showed. Every evening, Elias made dinner for Noor, helped her with her homework, and sat with her while she talked about her day at school. She once asked him, "Dad, do you like your job?" He smiled and said, "It's simple. I like simple." She didn't know that just a few hours earlier, he had noticed the same gray SUV parked near Renata's office for the third day in a row. She didn't know that he had quietly memorized its license plate. She didn't know that her father, the man who packed her lunch every morning and checked twice that her seatbelt was buckled, still had instincts sharp enough to notice danger before it arrived. That was the way Elias wanted it. Two completely separate worlds. One where he was just a normal, tired, loving father, and one where, if it ever became necessary, he was something else entirely. Weeks passed like this. Renata grew busier as the announcement date approached. Meetings stretched later into the evening. Reporters started calling her office, eager for early details. Competing companies grew louder in their public statements, some even hinting that Voss Biotech's research wasn't as original as it claimed. Renata ignored most of it. She had worked too hard, for too long, to let noise distract her. But the noise wasn't just noise anymore. One evening, after a long dinner meeting with investors, Renata came out to find Elias already waiting by the car, engine running, door held open. She looked exhausted, the kind of tired that comes from carrying too much pressure for too long. "Rough night?" Elias asked, which was rare for him. He usually didn't ask questions. "You have no idea," she said, sliding into the back seat. "Everyone wants a piece of this company before it even launches." Elias nodded and pulled the car onto the road. He took a different route than usual, one with fewer turns and better lighting. Renata didn't notice. She was staring out the window, lost in thought, her phone buzzing again and again in her lap. That night, as they approached a quiet underpass close to her apartment, Elias felt something shift. It was subtle, a parked car with its headlights off. A second car idling just ahead, blocking part of the lane. His hands tightened slightly on the wheel, but his face stayed calm. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I want you to stay low and keep your seatbelt on, no matter what happens next." Renata looked up from her phone, confused. "What?" Before she could ask anything else, the car ahead moved, cutting off their path. Another vehicle pulled up fast from behind, boxing them in completely. Elias's pulse spiked, but years of training took over instantly, pushing panic aside and replacing it with focus. Two men stepped out of the front vehicle, moving quickly toward the car. One went for the driver's side. The other moved toward the back door, where Renata sat frozen, gripping her phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Stay down," Elias said firmly, his voice steady, despite everything happening around them. What followed took less than a minute, though to Renata, it felt like time had slowed to a crawl. The man who reached for Elias's door found it locked and sealed tighter than expected. Elias didn't wait for him to force it open. He moved first, calm and controlled, stepping out just enough to meet the man before he could reach the handle again. There was no wild swinging, no shouting, no chaos, just quick, precise movement, the kind that comes from years of discipline, not anger. Within seconds, the first man was on the ground, disarmed and unable to get back up. The second man, seeing what had just happened, hesitated for half a second too long. That hesitation was enough. Elias closed the distance, and just as quickly, the second man was down as well, pinned and unable to move. A third figure, who had stayed near the second vehicle watching everything unfold, realized things were not going as planned. He turned to run, but Elias was faster, cutting off his escape route and forcing him to the ground before he could get more than a few steps away. The entire situation, from the moment the cars blocked them in to the moment all three men were subdued, lasted less than 2 minutes. No gunshots, no blood, just fast, controlled action from a man who had spent years training for exactly this kind of moment, even if he had hoped he would never need to use it again. Renata sat frozen in the back seat, her heart pounding, watching through the window as the quiet, polite driver, who brought her coffee order right every single morning, calmly used his own belt to tie the hands of one attacker, then checked on the other two to make sure neither of them could get up and cause more trouble. When it was finally over, Elias opened her door, his breathing slightly heavier than usual, but his voice as calm as ever. "Are you hurt?" Renata shook her head, unable to speak for a moment. She just stared at him, trying to understand how the man she had known for an entire year, the man who never said more than a few sentences a day, had just done something that looked like it belonged in a movie, not real life. Police arrived within minutes, called quietly by Elias the moment the situation had ended. Officers took statements, secured the three attackers, and began piecing together what had happened. It didn't take long for investigators to link the attempted kidnapping to a rival executive, someone who had been trying to delay Voss Biotech's announcement by any means necessary, hoping to buy time for a competing product to reach the market first. It was a desperate, reckless plan, and it had failed completely. As the scene calmed down and the attackers were taken away, Renata finally found her voice again. She stepped closer to Elias, still shaking slightly from the adrenaline. "Who are you?" she asked. "Really?" Elias looked at her for a long moment. He thought about brushing off the question the way he usually did, keeping his past locked away where it always stayed. But something about tonight had already broken that wall down. Maybe it was the fear he had felt, not for himself, but for what would have happened to Noor if things had gone differently. Maybe it was simply time. "I used to be in the military," he said quietly. "Special operations. I left after my wife passed away. I didn't want that life anymore. I just wanted to raise my daughter somewhere safe, somewhere normal." Renata was quiet for a moment, processing everything. "You saved my life tonight." "I was just doing my job," Elias replied simply. "No," she said, shaking her head. "Your job is driving. What you did tonight was something else." Over the next few days, the story of the attempted kidnapping stayed quiet, kept out of the news at Renata's request. She didn't want it to overshadow the announcement her team had worked so hard for. But privately, she couldn't stop thinking about what had happened, and about the man who had protected her without hesitation, without expecting anything in return. A week later, she called Elias into her office, something she had never done before. He walked in expecting a routine conversation about scheduling or upcoming meetings. Instead, Renata handed him a folder. "I want you to lead my personal security team," she said. "Full salary increase, full benefits. You'll still drive when needed, but you'll also be the one making decisions about how we keep this company, and the people in it, safe." Elias opened the folder slowly, looking at the numbers, the title, the new role laid out clearly in front of him. It was more money than he had ever imagined making. Enough to finally move Noor into a better school district. Enough to stop worrying about bills piling up at the end of each month. Enough to give his daughter the kind of stable, comfortable life he had promised himself he would build for her. "Thank you," he said quietly, genuine surprise in his voice. "No," Renata said, smiling for the first time in days. "Thank you." That evening, Elias picked Noor up from school just like he always did. She ran out with her backpack half open, shoelaces untied as usual, climbing into the back seat with a big smile on her face. "How was school?" he asked, watching her buckle her seatbelt in the mirror. "Good," she said. "We learned about volcanoes today." Elias smiled, pulling the car gently onto the road, the same calm, steady hands on the wheel that had handled so much just days before. To anyone watching from the outside, it looked like nothing had changed. A quiet father, driving his daughter home from school, listening patiently as she talked about her day. But something had changed, even if it wasn't visible on the surface. For the first time in years, Elias didn't feel like he had to keep two completely separate lives hidden from each other. The man who protected people and the man who raised his daughter were finally allowed to exist as one person, without fear, without hiding. As they drove past the golden afternoon light spilling over the quiet streets, Noor kept talking about her day, about volcanoes and her friends and what she wanted for dinner. Elias listened to every word, nodding along, glancing at her in the mirror every few seconds the way he always did. Because at the end of the day, no matter what kind of danger the world outside tried to bring, this simple, quiet moment of driving his daughter home was the only thing that had ever truly mattered to him. And for the first time in a long time, he finally felt like he didn't have to choose between being her protector and being her father. He could simply be both, all at once, exactly the way he had always wanted. Renata's company made its announcement 2 weeks later, exactly on schedule. The new treatment was praised by doctors and patients alike, and within months, Voss Biotech had grown into one of the most respected names in the industry. Behind the scenes, Few people ever learned the full story of what had almost happened on that rainy underpass, or of the quiet driver who had stopped it before it could ever truly begin. But Renata never forgot, and neither did Elias. Life settled into a new rhythm after that. Elias still woke up early every morning, still made breakfast for Noor before school, still stood by the yellow house at exactly 6:40, waiting for her to run out the door. Nothing about his mornings changed. But his afternoons looked different now. Instead of simply driving from one appointment to another, he spent time reviewing security routes, training a small team, and thinking several steps ahead about ways to keep Renata and her staff safe without ever making their daily lives feel restricted or fearful. He was good at it. Better than good, actually. Years of military training had given him instincts that most security professionals spent their entire careers trying to develop. But more than instincts, he had something else that made him different: patience. He never rushed decisions. He never let fear cloud his judgment. He thought carefully, planned quietly, and acted only when necessary. It was the same approach he used raising Noor, and it turned out to work just as well in his new role. Renata noticed the difference almost immediately. Meetings felt calmer, travel felt safer. Even the small annoyances, like unexpected visitors showing up unannounced at the office, seemed to stop happening as often, simply because Elias had quietly tightened processes that no one else had thought to question. One afternoon, several months after the incident, Renata found herself sitting in the back seat of the car again, watching Elias navigate through traffic with the same calm focus he always had. She thought back to the first time she had ridden with him, over a year ago, back when he was simply the driver, a quiet man she barely noticed beyond his punctuality. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course," Elias replied, glancing briefly at her through the mirror. "Do you ever regret leaving the military? Especially now, doing this?" She gestured vaguely, referring to his new responsibilities. Elias thought about the question for a moment before answering. "No," he said honestly. "I don't regret it. I needed to leave for my daughter. I needed a different life for her. But I think this new role lets me use who I used to be without losing who I am now. I get to protect people, and I get to go home to her every night. That's more than I ever expected to have." Renata smiled softly, understanding exactly what he meant. That's rare, you know, finding a way to combine both parts of yourself like that. "Maybe," Elias said, "or maybe I just got lucky." "I don't think it was luck," Renata replied. "I think it was you noticing things nobody else did, staying prepared even when nobody asked you to, and caring enough to act when it mattered. That's not luck. That's who you are." Elias didn't respond right away, but a small, genuine smile crossed his face as he focused back on the road ahead. Life at home continued just as simply as before. Noor grew a little taller, learned a few new subjects at school, and still greeted her father every afternoon with stories about her day. She never knew the full details of what had happened that rainy night months earlier. Elias made sure of that. He wanted her childhood to stay exactly as it was, safe, simple, and full of small, ordinary joys, without the weight of knowing how close danger had once come. Sometimes, late at night after Noor had gone to sleep, Elias would sit quietly in the living room, thinking back to that night on the underpass. Not with fear, but with a strange sense of gratitude. If things had gone differently, if he had ignored his instincts instead of trusting them, the outcome could have been far worse. But he hadn't ignored them. He had listened, prepared, and acted when it mattered most. That was the lesson he tried to carry into everything he did now, both at work and at home. Pay attention, stay calm, trust the quiet signals, even when everyone else dismisses them as nothing. A year after the incident, Voss Biotech had grown even further, expanding into new markets and helping even more patients than before. Renata often credited her team's hard work and dedication for the company's success. But privately, she also knew that none of it would have been possible without the quiet, steady presence of the man who had once been just the driver. Elias, for his part, never sought recognition. He didn't need his name in headlines or his story told publicly. He simply continued doing what he had always done best, staying alert, staying prepared, and making sure the people around him were safe, without ever making a big deal out of it. One Friday afternoon, as he pulled up outside Noor's school just like he did every single day, she came running out with a wide grin on her face, holding up a drawing she had made in class. "Look, Dad, I drew us," she said excitedly, climbing into the back seat and holding the paper up for him to see. Elias glanced at the drawing in the mirror. It showed two simple stick figures standing next to a car, holding hands, with a bright yellow sun drawn in the corner of the page. "That's us, huh?" he said, smiling. "Yeah. You're driving me home, just like always," Noor said proudly. Elias felt something warm settle in his chest as he looked at the drawing. Just like always. That was exactly what he had fought so hard to protect. Not just her safety, but the simple, steady rhythm of their everyday life together. No matter what challenges came from his new responsibilities, no matter what dangers the outside world occasionally brought, this, driving his daughter home, listening to her stories, keeping their life simple and steady, remained the most important part of his day, every single day. As they drove home together under the warm afternoon sun, Elias glanced one more time in the mirror, watching Noor happily chatting about her day, completely unaware of everything her father had done to keep their world safe and steady. And in that quiet, ordinary moment, Elias knew without a doubt that he had made the right choice, both that rainy night on the underpass and every single day since. He wasn't just a driver, and he wasn't just a former soldier. He was, more than anything else, exactly who he had always wanted to be, a father, doing whatever it took to keep his daughter safe, one calm, steady day at a time.